He never saw it coming. It was just another morning, another day to provide for his son, to keep his head down and do the work. Marcus, a single dad, had fought every day to rise above the challenges life threw at him. But that morning, everything changed. In the blink of an eye, his world crumbled. He woke up to find the powerful female CEO in his shirt, and what she said next left him speechless. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about a harsh reality, one that still haunts millions of people today. This is his story, and it's one you need to hear.
If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a powerful story like this one. Stay with us as we dive deeper into Marcus's journey and the truth that many still refuse to see. Marcus was just like any other father, trying to get by in a world that seemed to constantly push him down. He'd grown up in a rough neighborhood, surrounded by people who struggled just like him, people who knew what it was like to fight for every inch of progress. He wasn't rich, he didn't have connections, but he had grit. He had a work ethic that could not be matched. That was the foundation of his life, his drive to work hard and provide a better future for his son, Trey. Every morning, Marcus would wake up at 5 a.m., the hum of the alarm clock a harsh reminder that another day of long hours was ahead of him. He'd brew a pot of coffee, eat a quick breakfast, and get ready for his job at a marketing firm in the city. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and that was enough for him. Trey would still be asleep, the quiet of the apartment broken only by the sound of Marcus moving around, preparing for another day. His apartment was small but comfortable. It had that lived-in feeling, with the walls lined with family photos, memories of happier times, and Trey's drawings from school. Every corner of the place carried a piece of who they were. It wasn't much, but it was home. And to Marcus, that meant everything. He had dreams, big ones for Trey. He wanted his son to grow up with opportunities that he didn't have. He wanted to give Trey a future where he didn't have to fight the same battles Marcus had fought. But the world wasn't always kind. And no matter how hard he worked, it sometimes felt like the system was set up against him. The whispers at work, the subtle glances, the moments where he could feel the weight of his skin color bearing down on him, these were things Marcus had learned to ignore over the years. He had to. If he let them get to him, he wouldn't survive. But they were there just beneath the surface, reminding him that he was different, that he would always be different. His manager, Richard, was one of those people who never seemed to quite trust Marcus. It wasn't explicit, not outright, but it was always there. Richard would give Marcus the less favorable assignments, keep him out of important meetings, and never quite make him feel like part of the team. But Marcus pushed through. He had to, for Trey, for his future. There were days when it felt like the weight of it all was too much to bear. Days when Marcus would stare at his computer screen, his fingers hovering above the keyboard, and wonder if it was worth it. Wonder if any of it would ever get easier. But then he would think of Trey. His son's face, full of hope and trust, would snap him back to reality. He couldn't afford to let up. He had to make it. Things at work hadn't been great lately. The tension had been building, and Marcus could feel it. Richard had been more distant than usual. His requests for Marcus to stay late had become more frequent, and there was an underlying tone in his voice that made Marcus uncomfortable. It was subtle, but it was there. And then there was Tara, the CEO. She was new, brought in to turn things around. She was sharp, calculating, and most importantly, she was powerful. People whispered about her no-nonsense approach, about the way she seemed to have the ability to make people vanish with a single look. But what everyone really said about her was that she didn't care about anything but results. Marcus had heard all the rumors. He had heard the stories about how Tara didn't tolerate mistakes, how she expected perfection, and how she had no time for anyone who couldn't keep up. But he wasn't afraid. He was used to working under pressure. He thrived in stressful situations. If there was anyone who could meet her expectations, it was him. But even Marcus wasn't prepared for the moment when everything would change. The day began like any other. He showed up to work early, ready to tackle whatever was thrown his way. The office was quiet, the hum of computers and the rustle of papers filling the space. It was the kind of atmosphere that made it easy to get lost in the grind. But there was something different in the air that day, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. By noon, he had already tackled 3 major tasks and was gearing up for a meeting with Richard when his phone buzzed. It was an email from Tara, the CEO. "Marcus, I need to speak with you. Please come to my office at 3 p.m. It's important." A wave of unease washed over him. He tried to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just another one of those routine check-ins she liked to do with the employees. But deep down, something told him this was different. There was something about the way she phrased it, "It's important," that sent a chill down his spine. The afternoon crawled by. Every minute felt longer than the last as Marcus tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting to the meeting that was approaching. By 2:45, his nerves were on edge. He stood up from his desk and walked down the long hallway toward Tara's office. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridor, each one feeling heavier than the last. When he reached her office, the door was already open. Tara was standing by the window, her back to him. She didn't turn around as he stepped inside, and for a moment, Marcus just stood there, unsure of what to do next. "Sit down, Marcus," she said, her voice cold but not unkind. He hesitated for a moment before taking a seat across from her. The tension in the room was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Tara turned around, her eyes locking onto his. She didn't smile. She didn't even offer a greeting. Instead, she went straight to the point. "We've been watching you, Marcus," she said, her tone flat. "Your performance has been underwhelming. You've been slacking off, and frankly, I don't think you're the right fit for this company." Marcus's heart dropped. He didn't know what to say. He had been working harder than ever, staying late, taking on extra projects. But here she was, accusing him of slacking off. It didn't make sense. "You're just not meeting expectations," she continued, her eyes narrowing. "And I'm afraid it's time to let you go." The words hit him like a punch in the gut. He couldn't breathe. His mind raced as he tried to process what she was saying. How could this be happening? After everything he had given to this job, after everything he had sacrificed. And then it hit him. This wasn't just about performance, it never was. Marcus stood up slowly, his pulse quickening. His thoughts swirled in his mind, but one thing became clear in that moment. This wasn't about his work. This was about something deeper, something he couldn't change, something he had been trying to outrun his entire life. This wasn't just about one man's career. This was about a system that was built to break people like him. Marcus stood there, his mind racing, struggling to find the right words, but the silence in the room felt suffocating. He could feel the anger bubbling up inside him, but he held it in, afraid that one wrong move would be the end of it all. His fingers clenched into fists at his sides, his body tense. Tara's cold gaze never wavered, her face expressionless as she waited for him to speak. But Marcus was paralyzed not by fear, but by the realization that this moment, this confrontation, wasn't just about him. It wasn't just about losing his job. It was about something much bigger, something deeper. "I've worked harder than anyone else here," Marcus finally managed to say, his voice low but firm. "I've been here longer than most, and I've never slacked off. I've put in the hours, I've put in the work. And this isn't about my performance. It's about something else, something you're not saying." Tara's eyes flickered just for a moment before she looked away, as if she couldn't be bothered to acknowledge what he was implying. "Performance is everything, Marcus. I don't have time for people who can't deliver," she said flatly, her voice like ice. "I'm sure you can understand that." The words stung, each one landing like a blow. But it wasn't just the rejection that hurt. It wasn't just the fact that she was letting him go. It was the feeling of being invisible, of being dismissed without a second thought. The feeling of being told, yet again, that he wasn't enough. That his efforts, his sacrifices, his very existence in this space didn't matter. Marcus could feel the sting of the truth in her words. In that moment, everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, felt like it was slipping away. He had been trying so hard to fit in, to prove that he deserved a place in this world. But now, in the face of her dismissal, the reality was clearer than ever. He would never be allowed to be part of their world. No matter how much he worked, no matter how much he achieved, it would never be enough. But in the midst of the hurt, something inside him snapped. "Is this how it always is?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling with a mix of frustration and anger. "Is this how it always goes? I work harder than anyone, and it still doesn't matter. It's not about my skills. It's not about what I bring to the table. It's about who I am, isn't it? About the color of my skin. Isn't that what this is really about?" Tara's eyes tightened, but she didn't respond. There was a moment of silence between them, and Marcus could almost feel the weight of the room closing in on him. He wanted to yell, to demand answers, to force her to acknowledge the truth. But he knew it wouldn't make a difference. He had seen this before. He had heard these same words from people in different settings, in different situations. The system, the culture, the structure, it didn't want people like him to succeed. It didn't want people like him to rise. The pain of rejection wasn't just about the job, nor was it just about the career he had fought so hard to build. It was deeper than that. It was a wound he had carried for years, one he had learned to cover up, to work through, to push aside for the sake of survival. but now it felt raw and exposed. Marcus sat in his small apartment, his head in his hands, staring at the rejection letter from yet another job he had applied to. Another door had slammed shut in his face, and the weight of the world felt like it was pressing down on his chest. He could feel the frustration building up inside of him like a volcano, ready to explode. He was angry, not just at the rejection, but at the entire system that seemed to be built against him. His phone buzzed, but he didn't even look at it. It was just another reminder that he was being overlooked. He had tried so hard to be seen, to prove that he was just as capable, just as deserving as anyone else. But the truth, as harsh as it was, kept coming back to him. No matter how hard he tried, it would never be enough. Not for the people who ran the companies, not for the system that had been designed to keep him in his place. He was tired, he was so tired, but still he had to keep going. He couldn't afford to give up, not now, not when Trey depended on him. So he picked up the rejection letter and tossed it aside, his mind spinning, thinking of the next steps he would take. There had to be more to his story, more than just being someone who was constantly told no. He had to fight back. He had to find his voice, even if it was the hardest thing he'd ever had to do. Marcus had always been a fighter, but now it felt like the fight was much bigger than one man's struggle to find a job. It was a battle for dignity, for fairness, for equality. He wasn't just fighting for his job. He was fighting to be seen, to be heard, to claim his place in a world that wanted to push him aside. He wasn't just another man looking for work. He was a black man trying to survive in a system that had never fully welcomed him. And now that system had rejected him again. He was not just another statistic, though. It was time for him to break free of the chains that had held him down for so long. Marcus wasn't going to let this be his end. No, this was just the beginning. The anger, the hurt, the frustration, it wasn't going to break him. It would fuel him. It would fuel him in ways he never imagined. And he would find his way back to his purpose. He would fight for the future he had always dreamed of. For him, for Trey, and for everyone else who had been pushed down by the same system. Marcus had learned through pain that in order to rise, you had to burn first. With newfound resolve, Marcus took the next steps he knew he had to take. He reached out to those he trusted, asking for support, asking for help. He couldn't do this alone anymore. And for the first time in his life, he allowed himself to lean on others. He began attending local community gatherings, speaking out against the systemic injustice that had long been a part of his life. The pain he had been carrying, the weight of years of frustration, finally began to shift into action. One evening, at a local church community center, Marcus stood in front of a crowd, a mixture of emotions flooding his body. He was nervous, his palms were sweaty, his heart pounding in his chest. But there was something else too, something stronger. Something that told him that this was where he was meant to be, standing up, speaking out, and letting the world know that he wouldn't back down. I stand here today not just for myself, but for everyone who has ever been overlooked, ignored, or told they weren't good enough because of the color of their skin, Marcus said, his voice steady but full of emotion. The room fell silent as his words sank in. I've spent too long in the shadows, trying to fit in, trying to prove that I belong. But the truth is, I've been fighting the wrong battle. The real battle isn't about fitting in. The real battle is about standing up and saying, I am here, I matter, my voice matters. The crowd listened intently, hanging on every word. It was as if they, too, were hearing something that had been locked away for too long. Marcus could feel their energy, their hope, building around him. The anger that had once consumed him was now replaced with a sense of purpose. The more he spoke, the more he realized that he wasn't alone. There were so many others who had experienced the same struggles, the same injustices, and they were all ready to rise together. We are not invisible, he continued. We are not less than. We are human beings with dreams, with families, with hopes for a future where we can walk with our heads held high, knowing that we are equal. But we cannot do that alone. We have to stand together. By the time Marcus finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't just for him, it was for the movement that was starting to take root in that room. For the first time, Marcus realized that his voice could change things. He wasn't just one man struggling to survive. He was part of something much larger, a collective fight for justice, for equality, for change. That evening, as he stood with Trey outside their apartment building, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. His son, with his bright smile and eager eyes, was the reason he had fought so hard, the reason he would continue to fight. Trey, still young but wise beyond his years, had watched his father struggle, but he had also seen his resilience. Marcus looked down at him, his heart swelling with love and pride. "You know, Trey," Marcus said, his voice soft but full of emotion, "things may seem tough right now, but I'm doing this for you. I'm doing this so you won't have to fight the same battles I've had to fight. So you won't have to feel invisible like I have." Trey looked up at his father, his small hand reaching for Marcus's. "I know, Dad, I see it. I see how strong you are." Marcus smiled, ruffling his son's hair. It was a small moment, but it carried so much weight. Trey was growing up in a world that still had so much to fix, but Marcus knew that his son had the strength to change that world, just as he would. And Marcus, despite everything that had happened, was ready to fight for that future, no matter what it took. The evening sky behind them was painted with soft colors of sunset, casting a warm light on the two of them standing there. For a moment the world felt still, as if it too was holding its breath. Marcus knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for him but for Trey and for all the people who had been silenced for too long. They weren't going to stand by and wait anymore. It was time to rise. It was time to demand a future that was different, one where their voices could no longer be ignored. The next morning, Marcus found himself standing in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at his reflection. The man who looked back at him wasn't the same man who had walked into that office months ago. He had changed. The stress, the frustration, the self-doubt, it was all still there, lurking beneath the surface. But now there was something else, something stronger. He could see it in his eyes. He had found his voice. He had found his purpose. He wasn't just a man fighting for survival anymore. He was a man fighting for change. The reflection staring back at him was a symbol of everything he had overcome and everything he had yet to accomplish. Marcus ran his fingers over his jawline, trying to calm his nerves. His t-shirt was simple, but there was a strength in his posture, a new confidence that hadn't been there before. He was ready to take on whatever the world had in store for him. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time, Marcus knew that he was capable of overcoming whatever challenges lay ahead. This moment, looking at himself in the mirror, was his moment of realization. He wasn't broken, he was whole, he was strong, and he was about to take on a fight that would change everything. The phone call had come like a lifeline in the midst of a storm. Marcus had been unsure whether he should even bother applying for another job. His self-confidence had been battered by the rejection at his previous job and the blatant injustice he had faced. But something had changed in him. He wasn't willing to let that be the end of his story. So, when he received the call from an old friend offering him a chance at a new job, a door he thought was shut was opening once again. Now here he was, standing in front of a sleek office building in a suit that felt slightly too stiff on his frame, but he wore it with pride. This was the chance to reclaim not only his career but his dignity. As he walked into the building, the polished floors reflecting his every step, the lobby seemed overwhelmingly bright. The room was immaculate, modern, and spacious, a stark contrast to the cramped, oppressive feeling of his previous office. As he waited in the lobby for his interview, Marcus could feel the subtle nervousness creeping up his spine. His fingers fidgeted with his tie, something he wasn't accustomed to wearing. Yet despite the unease, there was a calmness too. He had come a long way from where he had been just a few months ago. The pain of the past was still there, but he had finally started to understand something crucial. He wasn't just fighting for a job anymore. He was fighting for something much bigger. He was fighting for equality, for recognition. This was a new chapter, not just for him, but for his son, Trey, and everyone else who had been told their voices didn't matter. When his name was called, he stood up, straightened his shoulders, and walked into that interview room with quiet confidence. He knew the journey wasn't over, but it was one step closer to the future he had dreamed of. He wasn't going to let this moment slip by. He was here, he was ready. Later that week, Marcus found himself at the front of a protest outside a government building, holding a sign that read, "Fight for equality, fight for justice." The crowd behind him was diverse, black, white, Latino, Asian, but they were all united by a common cause: the fight against systemic racism and the demand for fairness in every corner of society. The sky above was overcast, the clouds casting a heavy gray shadow over the protest, but the energy in the crowd was anything but dim. Marcus stood tall at the front, his eyes scanning the crowd, his body energized by the unity around him. The chants of "no justice, no peace" filled the air, and as he lifted the megaphone to his mouth, his voice boomed through the crowd, commanding attention. He was no longer just a man on the sidelines of the fight. He was part of something much bigger, part of a movement for change. His expression was focused, a deep sense of purpose in his eyes as he spoke words of unity and strength. It wasn't just a march, it was a call to arms for a future where racial inequality no longer held people back. The protest had grown over the months. What started as small gatherings of people sharing their stories had now become a massive wave of resistance, a tidal force that couldn't be ignored. Marcus could feel the weight of the people's hope and anger, their demand for change. He was no longer fighting just for his own survival. He was fighting for everyone who had been overlooked, for everyone who had been told they didn't belong. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The change he had been fighting for was in motion, and he was right in the middle of it. Weeks passed, and Marcus kept speaking, kept pushing for change. He joined more rallies, became involved in community organizations, and continued to raise his voice against the injustices he had suffered. But then something unexpected happened. One day, out of the blue, he received a message from an old friend, someone he had worked with years ago in another company. His friend had heard about his activism and wanted to meet. Marcus was cautious but agreed to the meeting, unsure what this old friend could offer him now. They met in a cozy cafe, the kind of place that felt warm and inviting, with soft lighting and the rich scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. His friend, now in a similar professional field but in a different company, was sitting at a table near the window. When Marcus entered, he saw the familiar face, one that brought back memories of their shared struggles, their laughs, and the bond they had formed back then. As they spoke, Marcus began to feel a sense of relief. This wasn't just a catch-up session. His friend was offering him a new opportunity, a position at his current company. It wasn't the dream job, but it was a start. It was a step forward. Marcus felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. The fight wasn't over, but this was the first concrete sign that things were changing. He hadn't just been speaking for change. Change was happening. This opportunity wasn't just a job offer. It was validation, a recognition that Marcus had value, that his hard work had meaning. As they hugged goodbye, the weight of the past few months seemed to lift slightly from Marcus's shoulders. His friend had offered him more than just a job. He had offered him a second chance. And Marcus, despite all the challenges, was ready to take it. The day arrived when Marcus stood once again at the front of a large protest, this time with Trey by his side. Trey was holding a small sign that said, "No justice, no peace." The crowd around them was vibrant, filled with energy, hope, and determination. The atmosphere was different now. It was no longer just about Marcus finding his own way. It was about creating a world where Trey wouldn't have to fight the same battles he had. As they marched together, Marcus looked down at Trey, his heart swelling with pride and love. His son was growing up in a world that still had its challenges, but now Marcus knew that Trey would never have to face these challenges alone. The fight for justice was a generational battle, one that would pass from parent to child, from one movement to the next. But the difference now was that Marcus wasn't fighting in silence anymore. His voice had been heard, and he had been able to pass on the lessons of strength and resilience to Trey. Together, they were marching forward, not just for their own future, but for the future of everyone who had been silenced, overlooked, and oppressed. The road ahead would be long, and the battle was far from over, but Marcus knew that this moment, standing with Trey at the front of a protest, was a victory in itself. It was a symbol of the change they had fought for and the hope that the future held. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, Marcus felt like they were finally on the right side of history.